Hey Night Church, last week a few of us went to YouLead and Grant Norsworthy did the keynote, and so for this week we're going to share a little bit from his sermon last Saturday, talking about what worship is and how we can rethink our ideas of what worship is. So I hope you enjoy. That's just a little intro from me, Jonty. Enjoy the sermon.
So I've told you I used to be a professional touring recording musician. And with that in mind, I need to tell you a story that's a little bit embarrassing, and it involves my rock star sunglasses. They're in here. And Mark, we might go to me on full screen here. Yeah, the sunglasses are in here, and they're all beaten up now because they've been around the world a few times. But check these out. What do you think? Can you imagine me wearing these? Yeah, playing my bass guitar, sometimes wearing these at a summer festival in front of a few thousand people. I'm going to leave them on for the purposes of a story I need to tell you. Now, this is while I was in the band Sonic Flood, and I'd flown from my home in Nashville, Tennessee, USA, into Toronto, Canada. And I was traveling on my own, just with my backpack and my bass guitar. And I was going to be picked up by a young guy at Toronto Airport who was going to drive me the couple of hours to meet up with the rest of the band who had traveled into Canada on the band's tour bus. And it was a bright, sunshiny day, and I had a few minutes to wait on the curbside, so I slipped on these glasses. A little while later, a car pulled up. I'd been speaking on the mobile phone to this young guy, and he goes, "Oh, you must be Grant from Sonic Flood." "Yes, I am." I loaded up my bass guitar, my backpack, got in the car beside this young guy, and we started driving. We were just making small talk as we went, and about halfway through that couple of hour journey, for some reason, I decided to slip off my glasses. And at that point, I realized they weren't the way I thought they were. They were actually like this. I looked like an idiot. I slipped the glasses off. There was a lens missing, and I tried to start finding the lens because I believed it must have just fallen out. I'm feeling around my lap and the seat and the carpet of the car, and my Canadian driver says, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm trying to find the missing lens. It must have come out of my glasses." And he said, "No, that's how I saw you at the curbside of the airport." I was flabbergasted. Like, I said to this young guy, "No, there's no way that could be the case because look, there's nothing here. There's something here. I would definitely notice that." And he said, "I've got no reason to lie to you." He was right. The lens had popped out of my glasses and was still in the sunglasses case in my backpack. And I'd been like this at the curbside of a busy international airport and totally unaware. And I tell you that for this reason. It seems to me that sometimes there can be something really wrong with me and I can't see it. Even really badly wrong. You know, I can be used to the thing that's wrong. It's been there all along. I'm distracted by other stuff. The thing that's wrong isn't in front of me for me to see. It feels like it's part of me. I'm going to suggest that I do not have the necessary perspective to see what's wrong with me. And I'm going to talk to us about worship today. And I believe there's a great deal of confusion in the Christian church right now about what it means to worship God. Now, I can't claim to be an expert on worship, the best worshiper, so that's why I'm teaching. You know, like if you've got a primary school teacher teaching long division to a bunch of 9-year-olds, you better be able to assume that the teacher is the expert on long division. Please understand, we're talking about worship, the worship of Almighty God. I'm not sitting here in front of you saying I'm the best worshiper. No. But I'm going to believe this. We all want to be worshipers, right? We all want to be swimming more deeply in the mystery of what it means to worship God. And I'm on that journey too. And so I want to tell you about my journey. But I want us to keep this in mind. Maybe there's a problem with how I'm seeing worship. Maybe there's a problem with how I think about worship, how I live worship. So will you please engage with this message on those terms? Have you noticed what's happened to the poor word awesome over recent years? You know, through overuse and misuse, the word awesome has totally changed in its meaning. It used to be a word that was reserved to describe something that filled us with awe and wonder. A mountain range could be awesome. A storm could be awesome. God could be awesome. There was a song from quite a few years ago that sang, "Our God is an awesome God," feeling like God fills us with fills us with wonder and amazement and a little bit of fear. But in 2020, we hear the word awesome used very loosely, flippantly. It means almost nothing. I was in a restaurant not long ago and I was asked if I wanted to have a drink with my meal, and I said, I'm happy with water. And the waitress said, awesome. So words change in their meaning over time. And the way we speak is really important. Here's a quote that I found from a guy named Stephen Talbot. He says, the flood of careless, unconsidered, cheap words is the greatest enemy of the profound word. And Ravi Zacharias, who died just a few months ago, said this, the flood of, the next slide, please, Mark. Changes in language often reflect the changing values of a culture. And it seems to me that if we think about this, we'll realize that how we speak is not only important to experts in linguistics, how we speak words is actually important to God. God tells us in the scriptures that my mouth speaks what my heart is full of, and my life is steered by my tongue, in the same way that a ship is steered by a rudder. And I found this verse in James 1:26. It says, if anyone considers himself religious and yet does not keep a tight rein on his tongue, he deceives himself. Get that? He deceives himself, and his religion is worthless. But you know what? I don't really resonate with that Bible verse, James 1:26, like that. I'll tell you why. It's because of the word religious and the word religion. You see it in the top line and the last line there. Through overuse and misuse, the word of religion has changed in its meaning, hasn't it? 50, 100 years ago, Christians used to happily describe each other as being religious. But in 2020, even Christians would use the word religious as a negative descriptor. Oh, he's so religious, that guy. Like it's a bad thing, like it's someone who thinks of themselves as being morally superior. So I did a little bit of Bible study. I went back to the Greek. Don't be impressed. Very easy to do with a mouse click these days. And I found that the Greek word threskeia is translated for us as religious and religion in James 1:26. And you know what? In 2020, it's better for us to read James 1:26 like this. If anyone considers himself a worshipper and yet does not keep a tight rein on his tongue, he deceives himself, and his worship is worthless. And for me, as a professional touring musician in the Christian contemporary music world, and especially playing in a band that was called Sonic Flood, that was known as being the forefathers of the modern worship revival, when I understood that translation of James 1:26, it knocked me across the room. And I want to offer you guys an apology. I'm really sorry. I've been part of a movement where I believe the word worship has been overused and misused and changed in its meaning. Because most often when you hear the word worship used, it's usually referring to maybe a Sunday morning event. Worship starts at 10 o'clock. But more commonly, it's a musical expression. It's songs. It's songs in the church. Worship band, worship song, worship leader, worship pastor, worship experience. I'm sorry. Worship is not a type of music. It's not a genre. It's not a subset of the Christian contemporary music industry. If we want to understand the deeper meaning of what it means to worship God, I think we need to go back through time and look at how the word was originally used, because a lot of the meaning has been torn away and changed. So it's interesting to me that this word worship, only 300 years ago, was never used as an adjective. It's not a describing word. We can go to the next slide there, please, Mol. It's not a describing word, no. It's not an adjective. You can find it in the Bible as a noun, but you'll never find it in the Bible as an adjective, a describing word like worship band, worship leader. If we're going to understand the deeper meaning of the word worship, we need to think of it as being a verb, a doing word. And interesting to me, in the English language, when this word was first developed, it was actually said like this: worth-ship, reminding us that to worship God is to show the worth of God, to ascribe value to God. And if you, like me, want to swim more deeply into this mystery of what it means to worship God, then we'd be doing well to remember that if it's true that our tongues steer our lives, maybe we should change the way we speak this word. And that's what I did maybe 20 years ago now. And it turns out the ship is steered by a rudder. Let's swim more deeply into what it means to worship God, shall we? To get there, I need to introduce you to a hero of mine named Dietrich Bonhoeffer. And now I don't want to tell you too much of his story. We don't really have the time, but Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a Lutheran pastor, theologian, and author, and he lived in Nazi Germany. He was actually imprisoned by the Nazis with only actually imprisoned by the Nazis and executed by them with only a couple of weeks of World War II to go. Why? Because he was one of the only people of the Christian faith who stood up against Nazism to defend the defenseless. And he started the first two sentences of his most famous book, which is called The Cost of Discipleship. You can find it today. It's a tough read, but I suggest you grab it. He says these words: cheap grace. I've got cheap graces there, but it's supposed to be cheap grace is the mortal enemy of our church. Our struggle today is for costly grace. And I believe what Dietrich Bonhoeffer published in 1936 is completely true of us in 2020. If we look to the cross of Christ and cheapen what that cost is worth, it's going to kill the church. We must struggle to find the full value of the cross of Christ, the full value of Jesus, his life, his death and resurrection. Now I'm going to change one word twice in Dietrich Bonhoeffer's statement. This is kind of what I live by. I'll say this: cheap worship is the mortal enemy of our church. Our struggle today is for costly worship. See, if worship is something that we can limit to about an hour and a half on a Sunday morning, or when we're singing along in our car to that Spotify playlist, or we've cheapened it, haven't we? And isn't it true we hear people say things like, oh, worship was great this morning, and they mean they really liked the band. They got a great experience. It was for them. But it seems to me that the worship of God is only to God. We don't get worship. God gets worship. It's a one-way street. A couple of years ago on Father's Day, a friend of mine sent me this photograph. It's a shocker, right? This little girl, I hope you can see that, got a great big screwdriver, and she scratched down the side of her father's car, "I love my dad." Now, I believe that this little girl's father loves her dearly, and there's going to be forgiveness, and it's all going to be okay. But I see that photograph and I wonder, am I like that little girl? Are we, the Christian church, like that little girl? You see, when we're asked, do you want to worship God? By and large, we're going to say, yes, absolutely. I'm a worshiper. I want to worship God. But what we do is we craft a form of worship of our design, not God's. I want to worship God, but on my terms. This is not how this dad wants her little girl to show her love for him. And we mustn't be like that little girl. We've got to worship God on his terms, not our own. Which brings me to the word paradox. I love the word paradox because if you use it in conversation, people think you're intelligent, right? And it gives you a chance to say really big words like paradoxical, paradoxically. But I want to make sure we're on the same page with this word paradox because it is overused and misused. And I'm going to explain to you at least my best understanding by showing you a picture of Morgan Freeman. Why Morgan Freeman? Well, even though he's a great actor, it's actually the sound of his voice that makes him so popular. He gets a lot of gigs doing voiceovers and narration, stuff like that, even for commercials and all sorts of stuff. And experts in America have done some studies of this. Morgan Freeman's speaking voice is one of America's favorite speaking voice. When he speaks, people listen. And the experts tell us it's because his voice is simultaneously rough and smooth. Doesn't that sound weird to you? Because roughness and smoothness are opposites, right? These things should cancel each other out. And here we see the nature of paradox. A paradox is when two things seem to be opposite, but actually they exist together. Paradoxically, Morgan Freeman's voice is velvety smooth and gravelly rough at the same time. And that's why people love listening to it. What about Marilyn Monroe? Why is this sort of B-grade actress, C-grade singer so popular, an American icon to this day? Maybe not popular with people who are watching this video cast right now, but still extremely popular. I'll tell you why. It's because of paradox. You see, somehow Marilyn Monroe would portray through her character sweet, innocent, naive girl next door, as well as danger woman, bombshell, sexy, seductress. And that's why she doesn't make sense. Our brain wants her to be one thing or the other, but she's not. She's both. But Molk, we better take her away. I'm finding her a bit distracting. Yeah, thanks, mate. That's good. You know, some people remember a band I was in with my mate Paul Coleman and Phil and my other mate Phil Gordon, PC3, Paul Coleman Trio. My favorite song we ever did was a song called "The Killing Tree." Amazing song that Paul wrote, and I had the privilege to play on. And "The Killing Tree" is our best attempt to poetically, artistically represent the paradox of the cross. Because that's a paradoxical song title, isn't it? Killing is a very heavy, dark word. Tree is a green, light, life-giving word. The killing tree draws people in. Well, the killing tree is about what I call the paradox of the cross, the greatest paradox of all. Because if I was going to take the message of the cross of Christ, his life, Jesus's life, his death, his resurrection, and what that means to you and me today, if I was going to take that message and make it as simple as I possibly could, I'd bring it down to these three words: die to live. That's a paradox. But I believe wholeheartedly that the message of the cross and what that means to anyone who would consider themselves a worshipper is that we must die to live. If I was going to get a tattoo, that'd be it, right there in Germanic script, die to live, but I haven't got around to that yet. If you're looking for this paradoxical die to live message being communicated in the Bible, you need to look no further than Romans 12:1. That passage tells us, therefore, brothers and sisters, in view of God's great mercy, offer yourselves as a living sacrifice. Can you see the paradox there in living sacrifice? You see, living, being alive, yeah, that's what we all have. We've got these bodies, we've got this flesh, we've got the ability to breathe in air and expend air. We are living. Sacrifice. Well, a sacrifice is something that has to die, right? So we have to offer ourselves as a living sacrifice. There's the paradox. And I'll continue the verse. Living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, and let that be your spiritual act of, I hope you know that the last word of that verse is worship. So we must respond to this amazing grace. So in this passage, it says God's great mercy. Another way we could say that is God's amazing grace. We sing about it. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. Whether you like the Tomlin version or whether you like the Phil Wickham version or whether you like the old hymn version, amazing grace God has extended towards us. We respond as a living sacrifice. We die to live. And that is your spiritual, reasonable, intelligent act of worship. It's a lot more than Sunday morning. It's a lot more than singing songs. In fact, I'm going to suggest that we can be in a church service on Sunday all we like. We can sing all we like. We still might be idolaters if we are not swimming into the mystery of what it means to die to live. The easiest and simplest way I can put this is my little mathematical formula that helps me. Grace in equals worship out. God lavishes us with his amazing grace. The best representation of that is Jesus, his only son, coming to earth in human form, fully God and fully human. That's a paradox. And he dies for us. And he rises from the dead. Amazing grace poured upon us. What is our response? We worship. Grace in equals worship out. And I'm going to suggest, and this has been my journey, as I have sought to experience and know more of God's amazing grace. It's not a one-time all. For me, it's a journey. More and more grace. I'm not saying that God's grace increases over time. I'm saying that more of who God is somehow flows into me. I'm pointing to the top of my head because I think of myself as being like a pipe. This is how I carry myself through life. I'm a pipe. And my purpose on earth is to allow who God is, his amazing grace, his Holy Spirit, to flow into me and flow out of this pipe that is Grant Norsworthy. What comes out of Grant Norsworthy that has as its source who God is, that is worship. Grace in equals worship out. And the pipe's not clean. There's gunk on the inside of the pipe. There's this restriction to knowing more of God's grace for me and being transformed into a more complete worshiper. And I call that grey-green sludge on the inside of my pipe self. That's me. Not who God created me to be, but that's the me, the old man me, the me that still wants to live life my way, still wants to self-determine, still wants to be my own small g God. But it seems to me that my ability to worship God and my selfishness are polar opposites. If I want my worshipfulness to thrive, my selfishness must be being strangled. If I do not strangle this selfishness, it will thrive. And my worship will become a counterfeit worship, a cheap worship, and maybe even just a Sunday morning and singing a few songs worship. You see, Jesus says things like this: if you hold on to your life, you're going to lose it. Give away your life. That's how you find it. We find the Apostle Paul writing in Galatians 2:20, it's no longer I that lives, but Christ that lives in me. I have been crucified with Christ. And this in Matthew 16:24, we see this: if anyone would call themselves my disciple, they must turn away from their selfishness, pick up a cross, and follow me. Selfishness, my selfishness, is the problem. And I don't think it's too far stretched to say it like this: if anyone would call themselves my disciple or a worshipper, they must turn away from their selfishness, pick up a cross, and follow me. Yeah, if I want to be a worshipper, I have to realize the cross is not just what Jesus has done for me. The cross is what is required of me. And Jesus continues in Matthew 16:25 when he says, for whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it. And there's the great paradox. And we see and hear people saying things like this. And honestly, I used to say things like this in interviews, What is worship? Oh, worship's a lifestyle. And you might be sitting there right now watching this stream saying, oh, yeah, I get it, Grant. I've already got this. I know this. Worship is a lifestyle. I can't agree with that statement, because to me, being really into heavy metal can be a lifestyle. Being really into yoga, being really like a hardcore vegan, those things are lifestyles. Jesus is not offering us another lifestyle choice. Not me choosing the way I have decided to live my own life. No, God wants me to lay down my life, not my physical life, although it was for Dietrich Bonhoeffer and many others, but how do I lay down my life? I would say that more accurately, worship is a living death style. I get to live, but it's no longer I that lives. Christ lives in me. I'm not self-determining anymore. I am here as a conduit, as a pipe for who God is on this earth. So what do you think is the main problem with the world today? Do you think it's poverty, COVID-19, terrorism, starvation, disease, global warming, racism, bullying? What do you think the main problem with the world today is? Well, I think I've got an idea. And I don't want to make this statement lightly. I believe this is true. The main problem with the world today is that I, Grant Norsworthy, am selfish. I call myself a worshipper. I want to be a better worshiper. But if I'm going to be honest with you, I'm still looking after me and my wife and my kids first. I'm making sure that we are safe, that we are well fed, that we are comfortable, that we are entertained, that we are fashionable and popular, and all these other things beside. I'm making sure that me and mine have got it together first. And you know what? I'll care for some other people if I can afford to, from what's left after I've taken care of myself. And not just talking about money here, talking about time and energy, everything that I am. You know, we started our time together with the Bible passage, James 1:26. Here's a reminder. It says, if anyone considers himself religious, no, that didn't work for us. Remember, it was thraiskeia, this Greek word that better translates today as if anyone considers himself a worshipper, yet does not keep a tight rein on his tongue, he deceives himself and his worship is worthless. The very next verse is important for us. James 1:27 says this, pure and perfect religion. No, it's the same thraiskeia, pure and perfect worship. Here is God telling us what pure and perfect worship is in his sight. And it's not Hillsong, and it's not old hymns, and it's not Bethel, and it's not Phil Wickham, and it's not Michael W. Smith. Pure and perfect worship in the sight of God is to care for orphans and widows in their trouble and remain uncorrupted by the world. The toughest part of that is the last part to me, and remain uncorrupted by the world. How could I not be corrupted? I've been swimming in a toxic soup of society that tells me not to die to live, but to buy to live, be popular to live, be good looking to live, be talented to live, be well educated to live, have well behaved children to live, go to a good school to live. And it's a lie. It's not the message of the cross. You know, Mother Teresa, some people would call her Saint Teresa today. She said something that shocked me when I first read it. She said these words, the poor are God in his most distressing disguise. Now, I don't pretend to understand this as much as Saint Teresa did. But she's referring to a passage in the Bible from Matthew 25. And this is me coming to a close. It's the story of the sheep and the goats. And raised in the church, I knew the story of the sheep and the goats. You know, that's when all the Christians are going to go to heaven, and all the people who aren't Christians, the goats, they're going to go to hell. Well, that was my understanding in younger years. But that's actually not what Jesus says at all. Matthew 25, we're not going to read the whole thing, is a passage where Jesus says on Judgment Day, all the people are going to be separated by God into one of two groups. The sheep are going to spend eternity with God. And as I understand it, they're the worshippers. And the goats, unfortunately, tragically, will not be spending the rest of their existence with God. I don't get it, but it seems to me that the goats are those who are not worshippers, those who have not shown the worth of God by the way they've conducted themselves in their lives. Now understand this, being a sheep is a free gift. There's nothing you can do to earn being a sheep. There's nothing we can do, no number of hoops we can jump through that qualify us to be part of God's kingdom forever. However, we need to realize that this passage in Matthew 25 is actually a passage to me about worship. You see, it seems to me that Jesus is saying, I am the least of these. I am the hungry, the thirsty, the naked, the sick, the lonely, and the imprisoned. And those people who are conduits of who God is in this lifetime will be compassionate towards the poor, will care for them. Jesus actually goes further. He says, for I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. That's Jesus talking. I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. And he continues and says, truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. So this has transformed my way of thinking about worship, what it is, what it isn't. It seems to me that the opportunity to worship God is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 and 366 on a leap year. It seems to me that while I do want to gather with other believers in a room or online and sing passionate praises to God as one of the ways I can express worship, I need to also be seeing that the way I raise my children is a way of worshiping God. The way I keep my marriage vow is a way of worshiping God. The way I speak to people, the way I conduct myself in business, every moment of every day is a chance to worship God. And if you are watching this, let me tell you, in my experience, there is no more fun, exciting, vibrant, life-filled way to conduct yourself in this life than to do this. God, how do I worship you now? How do I show your worth, God? How do I ascribe value to you now in this moment? And so I want to suggest to you two possible actions. If any of what I've said to you has resonated with you at all, there are two things that I'd like you to consider deeply doing. The action number one is this. I'd like you to rethink your use of the word worship. Would you do that? Now, I'm not going to judge anybody if they use the word worship, like worship band, worship leader, worship song, but I just want to share this. It was that change in my language, a very intentional and actually a lot tougher than I thought it was going to be. That change in my language is what started the ship changing course. Would you consider, reconsider, rethink how you use the word worship? You might find yourself saying things like singing songs as an expression of worship and caring for the poor as an expression of worship. And the second thing I'd like to suggest is engage more deeply with the least of these. Do you sponsor a child with Compassion Australia or World Vision, or are there some homeless people in your community? What is the need? Where are people who are hungry, thirsty, naked, sick, lonely, imprisoned? And have you been seeing them as a bit of a religious obligation rather than as an opportunity to worship God? Engage with them more deeply, and maybe Matthew 25 will start coming to life for you as it is for me. As I care for those in need, I'm beginning to see a little bit more Jesus and being transformed more completely into a worshiper. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, I want to thank you that you are a loving and gracious God. Help us to understand, God, that there's nothing we can do, nothing that we can do that earns us the right to be your children. But you have extended yourself towards us through Jesus, through the cross, to be your children. God, help us to be swimming more deeply into the mystery of what it means to be a worshipper in this moment and the next and every moment from this day forward. And we recognize that it's because of Jesus that we get to just speak to you like this, like you're our daddy, because you are. Amen.